Hi, everyone. It's Professor Miley. I'm thrilled that I get to talk about the first 10 years of cinema because I find this period of the motion picture endlessly fascinating. I could spend the whole semester talking about it, but we have a lot of other film history to cover, and film history isn't getting any younger. The reason that I love it is even though the movies are really short, they're not super action packed, and maybe don't have a lot of the bells and whistles that we're accustomed to, what they do have is the ability to watch people figure out what a movie is in real time. With each movie, each one that each filmmaker makes, they are basically creating what we understand cinema to be. They're writing the rules. And I can't get enough of that. And so I hope that, even though they're not always what we might want to throw on a Friday night when we're hanging out, I do hope that you find an appreciation or perhaps even a love for the stuff that's going on in these movies, because they truly are special. Now, in the first 10 years or the 20 years of the motion picture, we're getting a lot more established than we might think. Arguably, every advancement that we would think of as being something new in movies probably existed during this time, whether that is genres, close-ups, editing, movie stars, color, sound, all of that stuff, special effects. It's all in here. Sure, it's gotten more refined, but the invention of it the first time is popping up in here. Now, when I say that word first, I've got to be really careful, because when it comes to the early days of cinema, we don't know what the first thing is. It might seem kind of weird, like for something that's only 120 years old and is all based in documentation. How do we not know if something is truly the first or not? The reason is that 80% of all movies made during this time period are gone. The film stock that these films were made on was highly combustible and also very fragile and easily would deteriorate. So people will even find a lost film and open the can, and the reel of film is just basically glued together and you can't unspool it. Or more likely, they've gone up in a fire. Because this, like I said, it's highly combustible. If you've seen Inglourious Basterds, you know what I mean. But also, in some cases, these films are just destroyed because the people who made them thought that the silver in the film stock was more valuable than the film itself. At this time, these people did not see this as an invention with a future. This is something for which they could make a quick buck, and let's get all the money while we can, because this probably isn't going to last. It's not till much later when preservation even becomes a notion for movies. So when we're talking about the history of early cinema, we're really talking about the history of loss. So when we say the first, we are kind of saying that with air quotes around it, because we genuinely don't know. Case in point, used to be that people would think that Florence Lawrence, the American actress, was the first actress to be credited by name in a movie. Turns out last year in 2019, someone found out that someone else had been credited first, a French actor named Max Linder, sorry. So we're making discoveries all the time, but and we're having to always kind of rewrite the beginning of this because we don't always know what the first thing is. But here are some things that, at least for now, we know. So let's take a look at some of this stuff. First, we'll look at the zoetrope. This is not a movie. It's something that people would have maybe in their living room or parlor, or see at some sort of amusement attraction. And it's just a spinning wheel with a bunch of individual pictures on it. And you would peer through a little slit in it and you would see, like a flip book, or like Captain Underpants fans, how Flip-O-Rama works. And that's basically using our eyes' persistence of vision to make still images appear to be moving. This is the exact same principle that governs the motion picture. 24 individual images, when played back at 24 images per second, will give the illusion of continuous, uninterrupted motion. And that's what movies do. Later, in 1878, a photographer named Edward Muybridge wanted to find out if when a horse is galloping, if all four of its hooves are ever off the ground. And so they set up a bunch of individual cameras as a horse galloped past them and the shutters all clicked off in time to find out. And it turns out, yes, when a horse gallops, all four of its hooves are off the ground at some point. And when they cut all of these images together, they basically made the first movie. And so from that point, experimentation continues, and we get up into the 1890s, where we have the two early founders of cinema whose approaches to cinema basically create two camps as what movies are for that persists to this day. The first one of them is Thomas Edison, who makes this movie in his Black Maria studio in Jersey. Yes, this is one of the first motion pictures made, and it's of cats boxing. The history of cinema is also the history of cat videos. This is a real movie. And this is Edison's whole shtick. This is his approach, right? Is Edison's a showman, right? He invests in the spectacle. This is not something you would see every day. And that's what he thought the movies ought to be, right? Is give people wild attractions that they would never have a chance to see anywhere else, because that's what people will pay money for, right? They don't want to see real life. They want to escape real life. They want to see boxing cats, right? Or they want to see people make out. And so he has another very popular movie called The Kiss. And this, of course, at the time received, that this was salacious, right? Oh my goodness, we're getting into pornography here. People are going to see all of these lurid and disgusting motion pictures that will lead them to sin and all of that sort of stuff. Now, quick sidebar. For a different movie, while Edison is making movies and mostly white people control the means of production for motion pictures, there is a burgeoning African-American cinema developing right here with this film that some think is a parody of Edison's The Kiss. Not a remake or a reinterpretation, but straight up making fun of Edison's film, and so this is an early piece from African American cinema that we get, and then back to Edison and more of his wild attractions. People might want to go to the theater to see this guy flex, because he's not going to come to your house and do it. So you got to go to the theater and pony up a nickel to watch this, if that's what you want to see. And again, more sort of attempts at just sort of lurid male titillation, right? You have schoolgirls having a pillow fight, but this is made by the Edison Studios by James White. This is how Edison worked. Edison wasn't appealing to people's higher interests, right, or their moral compass, right? Edison was just filming the id and making a buck off it, and that's how his approach to cinema works. But there's another approach happening over in France with two brothers, Auguste and Louis Lumière, who do things like this, where their films, this first one that they make, is just filming workers leaving their factory. That's it, right? Depict life as it is. Allow people a chance to see themselves, right? Not to see, there's not a cat with boxing gloves to be seen in this crowd. Right. This is that we go to movies not to escape ourselves, but to confront ourselves, to look at ourselves. This is more of a documentary approach to movies. Right. And the Lumiere brothers, like Edison, their films are short because the cameras can only hold, in the case of the Lumiere brothers, about a minute of film. That's how long the reels were. Edison's were a little bit shorter at the beginning. But so they would, just put the camera down and let it go until they ran out of film. And these films would be publicly exhibited, right? Would draw crowds in their hometown of Lyon, France. So this is these are major attractions as well. Even though we might see the Edison films as being a little more of like crowd pleasers, these were crowd pleasers as well, because both boxing cats and people leaving a factory, they're equal when it comes to being novelties. Now, I'm going to give you a look at another Lumiere Brothers film, similar in its approach. It's people getting off a boat, and the camera assumes the position of someone greeting them when they arrive, right? Street level, kind of eye level view of this everyday event. And it's a nice little meta bit that most of the people getting off of this camera are photographers, right? So one of the early films is documenting photography. So moving on, but they also get into some more kind of quotidian stuff, slice of life, right? Just feeding a baby, right? Gotta get a cute video of feeding your baby so you can put it up on Facebook so grandma can see it, right? Like that's what these sorts of things are. It's a staged event, just like all of the other things are, more or less. But notice that it's not necessarily the same kind of spectacle that we're getting when we look at Thomas Edison's films. Notice so far everything we're looking at is from a single camera position. Right? The cameras aren't moving or shifting focus, and there's no cuts. Every one of these movies is a single shot, so really what we don't have yet in movies, we don't have editing, right? These are just single films playing on a loop. But the Lumiere brothers weren't above spectacle or above things like comedy. They've got this gem here that might be the first entry in the Jackass cinematic universe, called The Waterer Watered. Got him. So, as you can see, they will occasionally set up a scenario and do something that's a little more artificially narrative than straight up documentary. But for the most part, they're doing things like this. Now, this is their biggest hit. This is their Titanic, the arrival of a train at La Ciotat, which if you've seen the film Hugo, you have seen this clip. And right here at this moment, everyone watching it in the theater ducked. They were terrified. They thought the train was about to crash through the screen and run over them. It sounds silly, but it is true. This actually happened. Because remember, this is something that people have never seen before, right? They've never gotten that close to an approaching train, right, as this. And so for them, this is an action movie, right? Now for us, it's also just a bit of a marvel, right? Because now we are also getting a look at what life was like in 1896. Right? None of these people are still living, yet we can see how they lived and what they looked like then. These moments are frozen in time. The Lumiere brothers also filmed this one of taking down a wall at their factory, and it's an early entry in movies that are devoted to just watching stuff blow up. And so for that, it's pretty awesome. As you'll see, when this thing can stop buffering, it is going to be exciting. Wait for it. Wait for it. And wait a little longer, unfortunately. Oh, here it comes. Oh, yeah. All right. So, this is something you don't see every day. And it's also something you can only see once in real life. Now that it's a film, they can show this 20 times a day. If you want to watch it again and again and again, you can. You don't have to go around looking for walls to knock down, right? So there's that kind of preservation aspect of early motion pictures that's an appeal too, right? Is that things only need to be filmed once in order to be viewed as many times as the film itself will allow. Now, the Lumiere brothers do something even cooler here. Just when you thought this movie couldn't get any cooler, check this out. they also made a loop that rewinds it, and you can watch the wall come back up. What? Special effects, right? Here's an early manipulation that movies are here with messing with time, right? You can't do that in real life, of course, but now with this movie, you can go back in time. You can rewind events. You not only can preserve them and freeze them, but you can also play them backwards and forwards and make the broken repaired or come back together, right? Super cool. And then they do this one. This was a very popular subject for movies at the time. Every early filmmaker did a serpentine dance film. What's really cool, and you can see why, right? It looks awesome. But what you can also see here is that this movie's from 1896 and it's in color. Movies were in color. Movies had sound as early as there were movies, basically. The difference is the way that this movie is in color is that someone colored it by hand, frame by frame. 24 frames a second having to color. This is a 45-second movie. That's a lot of coloring. But what's even cooler is you notice that the transitions from one color to the next are gradual, right? So someone is sort of slowly doing the color shift up and down on the film stock. That's amazing, right? It's really painstaking work. There's also music that would normally go with these films, usually in the form of a live orchestra or band or even a piano player in the exhibition hall. But there were even early experiments at this time with synchronous sound. One of the early film pioneers we're going to look at next, Alice Guy Blaché, she helped try to invent a version of sync sound. But first, before I show you Alice Guy Blaché's movie, the Lumiere brothers on the 100th anniversary of their first movie, the French Cinematheque gave a bunch of modern filmmakers one of their cameras and a 1-minute roll of film and said, go make a movie with the Lumiere brothers camera. And David Lynch made this one here. So that's a 25-year-old movie that was made on a 100-year-old camera. Kind of cool. So now Alice Guy Blaché is a French filmmaker, and she, at the time and into the teens, was sort of like the Spielberg of French cinema, one of like the main director at Gaumont Studios. And this is one of her early films called The Cabbage Patch Fairy, which, believe it or not, this is one of the first movies to feature like a kind of contrived narrative, to tell some kind of story in a minute or less. And so we're watching narrative being born here. So while the storytelling is starting to come into play and get more sophisticated, some things are still staying the same here, 6 or 7 years into the birth of cinema. And what we're going to see here is that still the presentation style for movies is very theatrical, right? It's basically like you're looking at the camera's just acting like it's watching a stage production that it's filming. And so we can get a lot of cool things in the background. We can build sets and stuff like that. But right now, there's not much differentiating what we're looking at here from theater. That starts to change around this time, where Alice Guy Blaché and Georges Méliès are going to do a couple of things here like that kind of jump cut that has a rapid change as a special effect, here again, that's something you can't do in theater. And so we're gonna, even though we haven't seen a camera move yet this whole time. We haven't really seen a scene change in the same way, but we are seeing some things here that are unique to cinema that they're figuring out. So here we get another cut that changes the scenery, but realistically, you could do this without ever moving the camera. You just change the backdrop to the set, right? So we're still not experimenting with the camera's ability to warp space. We're really just looking at cinema's ability to manipulate time. But here, in this early film by Alice Guy Blaché, she's trying to tell the entire story of Faust in about 2 minutes. That's what we're getting in this film here. Okay, and now this next one, Georges Méliès. If you've seen the film Hugo or have read the book The Invention of Hugo Cabret, you're familiar with some of the things about Méliès in his film A Trip to the Moon, which is a masterwork of early cinema special effects and I guess just general whimsy. Here you're going to see, again, not a lot of experimentation with the camera, but look at the sets and the backdrops. All of that forced perspective and those background paintings, right? This is Méliès bringing the spectacle to movies and outdoing Edison for that. We're also getting the beginnings of the science fiction genre. Movies are less than 10 years old, and we've got sci-fi movies. It's a natural thing to try to film the future, film those things that people cannot see. And here's one of the most famous moments in early cinema. So we get the rocket crashing twice here, but it's worth it for those amazing effects. And which is what Méliès loved to do. Méliès is basically a magician that he wanted to play around with the magical aspects of movies. This movie's pretty wild. I would really recommend watching the whole thing because it's quite a trip as far as what they discover on the moon and things like that. It's quite good. Now here we have this film, The Sick Kitten, made at Edison Studios as well. The history of cinema is the history of cat videos, in case that wasn't clear yet. And we get a very important first here, or an alleged first, right there. We cut to the cat for an insert, and then we have the first close-up. It's of a cat. But this is a major deal because the close-up is one of the most important bits of early of the motion picture, right? This is because now it's a way for us to get closer to someone on the screen than we would get in real life, right? It now means that we're no longer looking at everything from that proscenium view any longer. Now we are right up in front of people. The intimacy level is huge. But what it also means is that you are manipulating time and space when you're making a movie because you have just jumped, in this case, maybe 6 feet closer to the action before without having to actually do the move or take the time to do the move. It's instantaneous. But now when you have a close-up and then you go from the wide shot to the close-up back to the wide shot, you have created editing, which now means that movies can piece together multiple shots taken at different times, all within the same scene. With the Alice Guy Blaché film of Faust and the Méliès film, we saw editing, but it was all just single scenes covered in single shots stitched together one after the other. Sick Kitten here, we have 3 shots, or really 3 cuts or sorry, two different shots and two different edits to create a three shots film, that is totally new. And when you start doing that, then the options are infinite. You can build up from there. At the time, people didn't think that this would work because they didn't think our brains would be able to make the spatial leap. However, they found that that wasn't the case because, of course, we already are used to viewing edited movies in our dreams. And then Edwin S. Porter really goes and runs with these innovations in his films, The Life of an American Fireman and The Great Train Robbery. And here with editing, we're getting the basic continuity editing of firemen rushing to a burning house, but he does something different or extra in this film that is, again, another advancement in narrative technique that plays with our understandings of space and time. So far, everything we've seen is continuity editing, one thing after the next, right? Like they go from one room, they enter the next room, the firemen go down the street. But what's coming up right here is some more magical stuff. We cut from the outside of the house to the inside of the house. And now we have two locations, of course, but what we're being told is while that stuff's going on outside, this is also going on inside. We're basically getting told, meanwhile, here's what's going on, right? And that creates the idea of cross-cutting, which, as we know, is the essential building block for tension in a movie. That's how you create the chase scene or the rescue scene, is you are looking at one group in peril or one group running, and then you have the other group racing to rescue them against the clock or trying to apprehend them. Right? This is all of the dynamism and drama of the motion picture right here. Now, they were still figuring it out. So what kind of happens is they do this thing, and then when they cut back to the outside of the house, they do the whole thing again of the fireman rescuing her. And so it's not like they've worked all the kinks out here, but what we're seeing is this magical moment where people discover, oh, we can skip around in time in a story, and people will, if we're clear in what we're doing, the audience will be able to keep track of all of the different threads in this movie. And that's just such an exciting thing because of the storytelling possibilities that opens up when you're liberated from time, or when you get to construct your own chronology. Right? You can do anything at that point, as long as you make sure the audience can follow it. Now, Porter's The Great Train Robbery is another example. This would be an early Western, right? And this one has a very fun ending to it. That is legendary, along with the arrival of the train at La Ciotat, as you'll see in a moment. So yeah, all of early cinema is a lot of cat videos and trains, but there's a lot of other stuff in there too. Cute babies, things like that. But so here the robbers have gotten away. This is the end of the movie. Spoiler alert. But I do recommend checking out the whole thing. So we get our big shootout. The bad guys, people get their loot, and then we get one of the most iconic shots in early cinema is going to be the next shot that shocked audiences and had them ducking under their seats. And if you've seen the end of Scorsese's Goodfellas, he references it in the final shot of that film as well, or the second to last shot, I guess I could say. It's coming in a moment. I apologize for the buffering issue here. So it's this next shot coming up. Here it is. So, of course, freaks people out. The way to end the movie with a bang, literally and figuratively. But so that's roughly the first 10 years of the motion picture. And there's a couple of other movies for you to look at on Canvas to see how the next 10 years of cinema develops these techniques even further, particularly with Lois Weber's film Suspense. Thanks so much for checking this out. There's an endless amount of material to explore here in early cinema, and I do hope that you go and check it out.